Hi, everybody. We're the Wildlife Wire, and we're finally back. Can you believe it or not? The little meme video from April does not count because we didn't actually show our faces. We were cowards. But we are here with another video. This is going to be our next video in the developer interview series instead of the Planet Zoo series. But just as a refresher, my name is Dominic Noce. I received my bachelor's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana in 2021. I've mostly been working with large and medium-sized carnivores across both North America and Southern Africa. And I am currently actually looking at a new position, but it's a bit too early to tell the details, so please stay tuned, but there's some exciting news coming our way.
Awesome. And I'm Justin Ruby. I graduated from the University of Montana in 2021 with my degree in wildlife biology. Been kind of working as a research technician before, and then a little bit in education. Now I'm working as an environmental educator and a biologist.
And today we are bringing you the one, the only, probably most of the fan base is here for him, Mr. Keenan Taylor.
Hi everybody, my name is Keenan Taylor. I am a scientific illustrator and fantasy author, and we are here to, I think, primarily talk about Kaimere and the books.
We're going to be interviewing Mr. Taylor here, and we are going to be asking him about his process for how he creates his speculative evolution and the research and the artistic process, as well as the creative process that then goes into his published fantasy work. And we thought that that would be a great way for many of our viewers to get some advice, some direction. It would be a really helpful thing because Tales of Kaimere is a very popular speculative evolution project, and knowing how to kind of get your creations in a good vision is something that I think a lot of creators would like. And so we're kind of hoping that Keenan might have some nice advice here. We're definitely big fans of his work, so we're glad to have him on. But I think the first thing we'll ask you, Keenan, is how does it feel that we are recording and probably going to be uploading this before the giant panda video that we already recorded over a year ago?
You know, life gets in the way. Fair enough. It's lots going on.
So yeah, but we're glad to have you. So we'll jump right in. Tales of Kaimere, very popular series. People really seem to love not just your illustrations, but also the creatures and just the ideas that you kind of create. And so we'll do this a bit step by step, but what we're first going to start with is just having you walk us through the core design process when you come up with your creatures. So kind of first off being like, okay, I want to have this type of animal, whether it's a specific taxonomic group or a specific niche, and then kind of working through there to not just make a creature that you want to make, but also a creature that is either, you know, whether you would consider it realistic or whether you would consider it grounded, and kind of developing that to really give your world that extra realistic feel.
Well, absolutely. So for the kind of core concept of Kaimere is that it is another planet that periodically takes life from Earth, puts it in Kaimere, lets it evolve independently. And so kind of in if I were doing this in the most conservative, grounded way possible, I would go through each of those harvesting events, pick some animals that kind of establish the new kind of status quo of the ecosystem, see how each of them develops and competes with native fauna, and kind of do that step by step throughout the history of Kaimere, adding in extinction events, geological, ecological changes. The reality is that this is a project that's been going on for almost 21 years come September. And there's been a lot of animals that I established the animals first and then kind of went backward. I'm trying to shift more to that other philosophy of, just because I find an animal exciting, to really try to err on the side of, well, what lines up well with available opportunities. And so I think I have a mix of both at this point. I have some harvests, like, for example, I had established in my first anthology there that narwhals are in Kaimere, and that didn't line up with any of the harvests that I had previously. And so I added one in kind of mid-Pleistocene Europe to account for how narwhals got into Kaimere, because I knew, all right, well, if they play a major role in one of the stories, kind of gotta have something line up for them. So it is a much messier process. Like, if I were approaching this now, I would kind of do it the way I discussed initially, where it's, really try to establish who the major players are in each of these harvesting events, because the harvests happen after localized extinction events, times of ecological unrest. It's not always a clean slate. Oftentimes native animals, persist. So that would, again, kind of be the way that I would approach it if I were to start a new project like this. That would be my approach. But the reality is, I have a lot of animals that I'm like, all right, well, I know that there's going to be a lot of ground sloths and terror birds. Those are two animals that I've already had a lot of affection for and have been in the project for now over 20 years. So I know, all right, well, if I'm going to have these, I should have a harvest that lines up, and I went with late Miocene South America for that one. So that is my long-winded answer to your question, is that it is not always a clean and logical process. I try to make it that whenever possible, but the reality is that I've got some things that are already baked into the system, and so but having those as a baseline, for example, I knew that I had Miocene South America, and so that allowed me to bring in a lot of the terms just leaving my brain. The Leptopterans and Notoungulates, that's the word.
Yes.
So I later incorporated those because I had established that harvest. A lot of the Pleistocene megafauna, the Homotherium, the mammoths, those only came into the project after you could thank the narwhal for all of those familiar Pleistocene megafaunal icons of Europe being added in. Your cave lions, your cave hyenas, they wouldn't be there if it weren't for the narwhal. So it's kind of a balancing act of that. Is sometimes I know I need to add a harvest, but once I've added that, it opens a lot of doors, and I'll try to go region by region. A lot of those, again, those Pleistocene European megafaunal icons came into the project because I was like, well, I've got a region that was hit really hard by climate change, and a lot of the native dinosaurs would have probably gone extinct after that event, and so it kind of gave me an opportunity. So that's something I really like to do is when I get an opportunity to fill something in, if it makes sense, I'll add it. I didn't originally plan on having Homotherium or cave lions in the project, but when things lined up for them to be added, I made the change. Mammoths were a pretty late addition to the project, all things considered, but now they've taken on a pretty significant role in southern Arvel, which is the western continent.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So kind of following right up into that, And I have experienced a little bit of this. So I think many of your viewers that have watched your regular uploads will know that I have done a bit of consulting for you. I think
You
about
have indeed.
4 episodes, I want to say.
Leopards, lions, red panther, and the muscelids.
Yeah. Because I don't
Were
count
there
the hyena
others?
one. The hyena one, you watched our video, but I didn't
Yes.
have any direct communication before that.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
you do run into this, and on Natural History Channel has talked about this in some of his Spec EVO videos, where you can have an idea that, oh, I'm going to implement this taxa doing this thing, and then as you research, you find out, oh, they don't actually do that. And then it becomes, and this is an important thing as a creator, do I want to be stubborn and make this work, or am I going to change gears, and am I going to change gears and find something different, or maybe there's another animal that I find later down the line that fits that role better. The specific example I can give right now is you had the dire badger, which was a species of wolverine that you kind of had as being this big, powerful predator that was running through, causing all of these extinctions. And I looked at the script and I said, okay, so this thing's living in what seems to be pretty warm climates. How did you solve the snow denning problem? And you just looked at me like, what? And, we worked it out, and, it's still a species that's there. It still had its impact, but, it was really fresh and nice to see a content creator look at this change in information and work with it. Because I think that there are a lot of content creators, especially in the animal world, that would rather keep misinformation if they find it interesting or they just like it. So if you want to talk a bit more about that sort of process when you do it more broadly, I would definitely be all ears.
Yeah, absolutely. So for that one in particular, I really enjoy when that happens. I find it is... when I first started presenting this project, I really wanted to give people an established canon. This is Kaimere, but the reality is that this is a project that is kind of its development is what's funding its development. And so about, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, I decided, you know what, I can't just keep doing this piecemeal. I need to just start putting it out there, accept that it's going to be a little messy. It's going to be a work in progress. It's going to, I'm going to be developing it publicly. And that was, I think, very freeing to give me kind of permission to myself to say, hey, we're going to roll with the punches. There's going to be some lore changes as things go on. And that is I think a really nice example of one of them, where early on I had a fascination with wolverines. I thought they were a very cool animal, and I thought that they would be a good example of kind of the idea of a threat to dinosaurs in the form of mammals, of this cursorial, tough, formidable predator that would be devastating to a lot of their young and eggs, in a similar way that cats and rats, and I believe other muscelids, often were in island ecosystems. And cats especially come to mind. And so I had built up this idea of the wolverine as having that effect, and I think as soon as you brought that up, that was an exciting opportunity to think, well, here's actually, it's kind of great because at the time, 1.5 million years ago, things were very cool. So I was able to think, all right, well, I can still keep this aspect of the lore, that when they initially arrived, there was this pulse of devastating success of this animal, the wolverine, and it did result in a lot of dinosaur extinctions, primarily through nest raiding and attacking young. But then as Kaimere warmed once more, as the climate stabilized and the surviving dinosaurs learned to work with it, so that's something I really enjoyed. Was it was a challenge to my prior assumption. It threw a wrench in it, but I think that I was able to work with it, and it certainly feel like it made the project stronger for it. So I quite enjoy when I run into that sort of thing in my own research, or when I'm talking to consultants. You're by far the most recurring consultant I have had, but it is certainly something I like when it happens. I think I don't want to make too many presumptions on a lot of the creators you're talking about, but I know for me, I have such a wide-reaching level of interest, and I usually have about 1 to 3 days to become an expert in the thing I'm presenting on, and so I want to hold myself to a high standard, but the reality is that I know I'm gonna get. I know I'm going to get a lot of things wrong, but that I am very aware of how limited an actual level of expertise I'm giving myself. And so I think that might be part of why it doesn't bother me in a way that it might bother some creators. I mean, if you are building your identity around knowing things and you get those things wrong, I can see how that would be something you might have a reflex to defend yourself against, especially if you've got 3,000 people online telling you that you got this thing wrong that you were sure was right. I think an unintended advantage that I have is that I don't build any of my trying to put this diplomatically. I don't run into that issue, because like if I get something wrong about something I invested 3 days of my time in, all right, I'll own it. That doesn't whatever. Now, if it were something horribly wrong with one of these books that I spent a year on, that's going to hit me a little harder. Yeah. I know that there are problems with some of the books that I really appreciate feedback and I think that things get stronger with critique. So that's another thing that I know that this project is going to be stronger if I don't cling to concepts. Another example of this, kind of pursuant to what I was talking about with the mammoths, is that one of the earliest episodes I had was on elephants, in which I had only, I think, 3, maybe 4 species of mostly small proboscideans in Kaimere, and I've certainly expanded that roster, and a lot of it had to do with, as I opened up this habitat in southern Arvel, well, I could dig my heels and then say, well, I said there were only 4 species of proboscidean, and gosh darn it, I don't care if mammoths seem like they do really well in this open steppe with lots of grass and minimal competition. Gosh darn it, I said in the lore, or I could just say, well, it's a project in development. We're adding mammoths because they make sense and they fit with the timeline. I know that there's a lot of my fans who would like to have a set lore, and I respect and appreciate that, but that's part of why I keep putting off making the field guide of Kaimere, is that is something that I'm going to put out when the project is done, or at least the known world, when because I want to present my books. If it's in the book, it's canon, is kind of my approach to this, and the channel is my development. So I like it a lot when I get critique and feedback on weaknesses in the world building, because I think that just makes my project stronger, and now is the time for it. 10 years from now, when I've got 3 field guides out, what are you going to do? It's already in paper, it's already in print, it's, hopefully at that point it's out there. Now is the time that I can apply that feedback and critique. So I welcome it to a point.
Yeah. Because, we all know that you will whip out the cannon when you just feel like it, so...
Yep. There's a little bit of something I find exciting. I might try. I might try to put in a little bit more effort to work it in if there's something that kind of... something I love putting new research at the on the channel. And so if there's something new that was discovered, I like putting that in the front when I can. Homotherium was an exciting example. The mummy that was published, it was really exciting to incorporate that into my Homotherium redesign, for example.
Yeah. Well, I will say you're not alone on the whole you can be wrong thing, because I will tell you right now, some of our videos are not there is some things that minor things that we have said that have been wrong in some of our episodes, and we've owned up to it in the comments. We're oh, yep, that was a slip of the tongue. But for example, our Rhino episode is already outdated, because a couple months after that video came out, there was this amazing paper that was hey, remember how we always said that the black rhino was an obligate grazer? An obligate browser, sorry. Turns out, in a lot of situations, they actually prefer to eat grass, and the browsing is actually a fallback food, or it's something that they're eating when they're mostly in woodland, and so it's not really a browser, it's a mixed feeder, whereas the white rhino is a true grazer. And so that's a huge change in our understanding of an animal that we've been living with since, the dawn of human history, and, it just so happens that, that's something that largely conflicts with a video that we made that's trying to be accurate. But I will say you're definitely well informed, because I have noticed times where I'm about to go on a rant when we're talking about something, and it's not anything that you've said, but it's just something that I've just generally seen a lot in the context. For example, when we were talking about American lions having proportionally longer legs, and everybody's saying that, they were much better runners than a modern lion. And I was ranting. It's yeah, well, they're also bigger, so they couldn't have been that much better of a runner. And we see examples of giraffes and camels not being better runners than gazelles, despite the fact that their legs are way longer. And you just went, well, it's just a long stride length is also just really good for walking. And I was thank you. Thank you. You know, I didn't even have to say anything. You already knew. So it is lovely to see those types of situations. Unfortunately, it looks like Justin's having some issues with his connection, because I would like for him to ask something once he gets back. But in the meantime, I will just quickly say, because we are recording this after you did have a public canon incident, or a canon threat, I guess.
Yes.
I do now want there to be a video that is just Tales of Kaimere, but the canon destroyed the context, and it's just a funny video of just random photos and speech bubbles and clips.
I wasn't sure how serious you were when you initially proposed it, but I was very quickly on board. I mean, that was one where I was I think I already looked it up and it didn't line up with the timeline. I mean, I am happy to play, I don't know, maybe fast and loose is the wrong term, but I'm happy to say the fossil record's incomplete. We don't really know the full range of things, and so maybe I did this in my Miocene South Africa episode, where I said, like, there's an animal that we don't have evidence for almost 2 million years, but the idea that this thing that we, I think, only have like a jawbone of this large hyenodont, who knows? That's obviously not the only, it was not a single individual specimen. So the idea that a related animal, so I play a little fast, but that gets much less tenable in the Pleistocene. And so the idea of me just hand waving, is it Miracinonyx? Is that how it's pronounced?
I pronounce it Miracinonyx, but I don't know. Like,
I mean, I've only ever read it. This is the first time me
yeah.
saying it out loud, so I'm going to defer to someone who knows what they're talking about. But like, for me to just hand wave that it was closer to the East Coast, not as tenable as me saying, well, maybe a Megistotherium relative might have lasted another 1.5 million years or whatever. So
you're dealing with larger scales of time. So
and the further back you go, the less certain you are. Mm-hmm. That is definitely something I established with, like, for Kaimere within the past 15 million years, I'm generally comfortable giving people, like, rough times and places, but, like, the chances that we have good material for dinosaurs that lines up with a good fossil formation for us and in Kaimere, minimal at best. So I tend not to get into specifics. But yeah, I can't play as fast and loose in the Pleistocene because that fossil record exists. In a statistically significant way. So
yeah. Okay, Justin, before you have another crash and burn, I am going to hand the reins over to you so that you can get something out.
Cool. I think my question would be, did this project start with the story narrative in mind, or was it more of a science illustration project?
Definitely the story. I mean, Kaimere began as a map-making project in middle school, and very quickly spun out into stories in Kaimere. And the first map that I drew, kind of inspired by the Perry Reese map, having a bunch of little creatures like the one behind me now, was, it always had prehistoric creatures, many of which were kind of prehistoric analogs to a lot of fantasy creatures. So that aspect of the project has always been the case, but they were not really. I never intended Kaimere to become a world-building focused project. There was always going to be, modern descendants of prehistoric animals. That's a very old part of the project. But yeah, it was definitely writing first.
Yeah.
I mean, even with my first anthology, okay, I think that was kind of the approach that I was taking. I had designed some of the animals, but a lot of them weren't much more than kind of my original concept of a lot of them 20 years ago when I had read and enjoyed Dinotopia, but I always remember as a kid thinking, like, well, why are they all the same genus and species? And in some cases, they even evolved into a new species, like the Quetzalcoatlus skybacks was a newly evolved species. And so for me, kind of the idea of speculative evolution came from that idea. But I didn't really do anywhere close to the level of development of creatures beyond how they appear in the books. I knew, for example, the Entelodonts that I'm working on, the prehistoric, the hell pigs or whatever, like, they've been in the project, for a very long time, but I didn't do their full speculative evolution. I just said, like, oh, it's a long-legged descendant from Entelodon. Back to writing. So to answer your question, that is very much how it began, was the writing was the primary focus.
Nice. And then I guess along with that, what was kind of the initial spark for your first kind of book/writing project? Like what made you decide on, like, what came first?
So the very first version of a story in Kaimere was when I was 14. So this would be 2006. I had just read a book whose author escapes me. It was 1421, the year China discovered America, which is a pseudo-history. It's bunk. Don't, like... It's not a real historical account. It's an interesting concept that the treasure fleet of Zheng I think. That's another one that I've read a lot, so I'm sorry. Zheng He, I think it's pronounced. Had a treasure fleet that was sent out, explored a bunch of China's of the known world that China was aware of at the time. And in this book, this author posits, well, I think the Americas was part of this discovery in the year 1421. So this would long predate Columbus's expedition. And Zheng He was a real person. He did explore the known world, which would include Asia, Europe, and Africa. He brought a giraffe back to the emperor. So, like, it is not an entire fabrication. So the first book that I wrote was kind of taking that idea and doing, like, a historical fan fiction of what if Zheng He, his treasure fleet one of his ships got lost in the Bermuda Triangle and ended up in Kaimere. It is a very rough book. I might revisit it at some point. Probably not. But that was my first story with this. Another kind of similar concept was the Moroccan explorer Ibn Battuta, kind of similar to Marco Polo, had an exploration of the known Muslim world. And another story I wrote, I think this one was when I was 15, 16, was Ibn Battuta coming to Kaimere, and I did a lot of that kind of historical fan fiction throughout high school. So I would say that was a lot of my earliest works. And then I did a novel, The Lost Hellfighter, which follows a World War I veteran on his way home to the U.S. after fighting in Europe, getting caught in Kaimere and having to spend a year there because the portal only opens once a year. That one I wrote in freshman year of college. I sent it to a bunch of editors, a bunch of literary agents. Most of them ignored me because, fair enough. It's an insane industry with hundreds, if not thousands, of submissions a day. One of them did get back to me, which was very cool and exciting of them, to basically say she was like, this is very rough, but I like the idea, but a lot of the, like, basic concepts of writing, I can tell that you're very messy on, the character arc, that kind of thing, quite rough. I recommend short stories. To kind of, she basically said, go write some short stories that'll teach you how to structure a narrative, how to, it's much easier to revise and polish an arc that takes place over 8,000 words as opposed to a full novel. And that was advice that I wanted to run with, but then I was doing very poorly in my freshman year at college academically because I was in two. I was doing far too many extracurriculars and taking far too many credits, and also trying to write a book. And my grades were just rubbish. So I set aside that. And then I kind of, over the next few years, would periodically write some of the short stories. Death Walks on Broken Wings is my first short story in the anthology. That's when I wrote pretty much right after she sent that email, so that would have been 2013, I think. I polished it before putting it in the book, but it's pretty much the same story. And then it wasn't until I got back from grad school in Seattle, where I was studying scientific illustration, I got back and I was like, all right, I want to try this again. I want to try writing again. And rather than trying to redo the novel, I revisited some of those short stories I'd written over the years. And I got enough of them together that I started to self-publish them online, because I did reach out to another couple agents and no one was interested in an anthology of an unknown author's, fair enough, fair play. I didn't really go in with any expectations, just figured I'd give it a go. And I had an absolute blast putting that together. COVID happened, and I basically was furloughed from my baby management position at Barnes & Noble and was given several months of more money than I've ever made in my life and no job. And so basically I wrote the rest of the anthology in a couple months because I just had time and I didn't have to worry about money for the first time in my life. And it was... so that was really what kind of set me up as like, okay, this is something I've always wanted to do, but that was the first time that it really felt like I had my feet under me. This is something that I can do. And then the YouTube channel, my goodness, that has made it all possible, because the books don't make much money.
Yeah, that, like, when you told me that you were making more money off of the YouTube Patreon than the books,
easy.
It was like, oh my god. Speaking of the books, everybody that's on the YouTube Patreon that hasn't bought them, buy them. They're good books. I've read both of them now. I got both of them for Christmas, and they're great. I mean, it's nice because it is that short story, so you can kind of like read one, put it down for a while. You don't feel like super incentivized to just like binge it all at once with a lot of other more complete stories. I really like how in the second one there's a lot of you revisiting some of those same characters, so there is a bit of a continuity aspect of it. And they are just generally good. If you're interested in fantasy, science fantasy, whatever, like, yeah, they're well-written stories. I enjoy them a lot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. But I do want to, as we were talking a bit about that, you kind of mentioned how, like, some of your creations, you've done a lot of the fleshing out because of the YouTube channel. And when I was reading through these stories, one of the things that I actually somewhat enjoyed was that when you were describing the creatures in the story, you didn't actually always say that much. And the way I kind of compare it is like when Michael Crichton wrote the first Jurassic Park and it has all the dinosaurs in there, he doesn't actually like give very detailed descriptions of them. He's just like, oh, they're big and they're doing this thing, they're eating, they're running away, they're chasing, they're sleeping. But with this, it's like you very easily could have been like in, Death Walks on Broken Wings. Oh my god, there was this giant as dark pterosaur that was like running around, but you don't. You use the canon name, and that's because this is a story in that world being told by a person that was born and raised in that world. They are familiar with these animals, even if the audience isn't. And so you didn't necessarily like fall for that trap of like explaining to the audience and keeping it within the story. And so I didn't know initially that you had kind of the illustration charts at the end. So there was a little bit of like times where I was just like trying to figure out like what they are, and I'm like, oh, I think from these little bits and pieces it's like, oh, a Bauku gets out, and I'm like, oh, what's a Bauku? Yeah. And then you like read some of the descriptions, I'm like, I think it's some sort of ceratopsid, and then you go to the back, it's like, oh yeah, it's a styracosaur, okay. And I really liked that because I feel like it stays immersed in the world. So that was one of my favorite things that I've been holding off on telling you, because I know that you've been wanting to hear what my thoughts were on the book.
Yeah.
So
well,
keep that up.
Will do. Yeah, no, it is something that I will get into in I really try to keep it to what makes sense for the character. In one story in the next anthology, which I really hope is coming out in the fall. One of the characters is from Earth and has a pretty robust naturalist education. The story is set in 1910, and he calls the big theropod a megalosaur, and that is going to drive some people insane, I'm sure, but roll with me. It's actually a megaraptor, and it's fine. Don't worry about it. But that is kind of an opportunity for me to kind of put on my own, animal dweeb hat and have him do a little bit of that. But for the most part, the stories are, you're not going to stare at a cow that has been in your neighbor's yard your whole life and think about its anatomy and describe it in much detail. And that's kind of the approach that I have for a lot. Like in the second story in the first anthology, I call it a mountain bear. It's a mylodont sloth, and I think I do mention that it's a sloth at one point, but it's not a big deal to any of the characters that there are big sloths, and so it's not something that they would really dwell on.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you liked it. I think it makes it more immersive to approach descriptions of animals and things in a way that is very character driven, and that's something I definitely plan on keeping going forward.
Yeah, and you do also have, there's one in the Songs of Inland Sea novel, but also just stuff that you've narrated and uploaded to YouTube where you actually have stories where the animals are the focal characters and really exploring how they're moving through the world as well. So it's not just always a human element, and I'm sure there's definitely a bit of fun in writing from an animal's perspective and seeing how you can differ that from the traditional human perspective and how you get around dialogue and things like that. I know that the species you chose for Songs of Inland Sea is, near human levels of intelligence, so that helped a lot with keeping that similar structure. But I do hope that you explore that a little bit more. We get to see a bit more variety in who's the subject of the stories.
I plan on, for most of the next anthologies, having at least one non-human perspective. I'm not going to lock myself into that, but I know that in the next anthology after this one, there's going to be quite a few. And then the last anthology in the 7 that I have planned is a purely animal perspective anthology, and I'm really looking forward to working on that one. I have quite a few short stories that I've written over the years that I'm going to be expanding on. One of them is from an octopus's perspective that I'm probably going to make one of the krakens, for example.
Okay.
So it's if you enjoyed that one, there's going to be more where that came from.
Yeah, I think that one was one of my favorites from Songs of Inland Sea. I think Kiret's story is is still my favorite overall. It was my favorite in the first book. I think it's my favorite in the second book as well. I just think it's a really interesting tale, and you kept adding more characters that were equally as interesting to it. So I think that was a really good continuation, and I'm glad it takes up almost half of the second book.
Yeah, that one. And that happened with this next anthology as well, where Kirut's story, the part 3, I ended up breaking into 2 parts because it was taking up more than this. The third one was bigger than the second one. I was like, all right,
gosh.
we gotta rein it in here.
You're probably just gonna eventually have to do that one as its own book at some, like, rebind it.
Yeah, my plan is, so I have 2 books that I'm having come out very soon. One of them is the next anthology, which is a Beyond the Known World, Realms Beyond the Known World, and the other one is set on Earth with enchanted beings who have Kaimere magic, some of whom I explored in the first anthology, and in that one I did a ton of sketches that I'll be putting throughout. And I think probably what I'm going to do with Kirut's, when all is said and done, is have those 4 parts all in one book with a bunch of illustrations throughout. Because I think that'd be a lot of fun, and
I'd probably buy it again.
Yeah, I would put all the illustrations online just so that I'm not, I try to avoid paywalls whenever possible, and that would be something where I wouldn't want people to feel like they need to get it, but if you wanted to, it'd be an option.
Okay.
when all
Poor Justin's not having a good day.
Yeah,
He's dropped off again. Oh no, what's going on? So I do have one other major topic. So to start off, I know that you are a board game guy because we have talked about board games before. Are you a D&D guy to start off?
Oh yes, very much so.
Have you or have your friends made you do a campaign set in Kaimere, or are you holding off?
Yes, I have done a lot of one-shots in Kaimere. I have done... I did a campaign in junior year of college. Might have been senior year, where I did 2 different groups having separate adventures, and then we set aside a weekend where the 2 different groups came together and worked together to defeat the big bad of that arc. And I've done that since a couple times, not with Kaimere, but in general. It's something I really like doing, is having 2 different groups getting different pieces of the mystery and then coming together. And I would love to do a Kaimere role-playing game down the road. That's another thing that, like the bestiary, I want to wait for the setting to be a bit more developed first. And if I do traditionally publish some of my novels, which I would like to do, gosh, it sure would be nice to have a team working with me on the role-playing game. I know that wouldn't be Dungeons and Dragons, because the most powerful witch in Kaimere, the most powerful demon, these would all be like 5th level Dungeons and Dragons power levels. But there are other role-playing game systems that I think are geared for something that's not quite as cosmically powerful as Dungeons and Dragons can be. And so Savage Worlds is a game system that my friends and I have played quite a bit of, and that is one that I think I would base Kaimere on, or maybe even work with them, depending on how wildly successful Kaimere becomes. We'll see. right now I think I'm a little too niche to try to reach out to them and see if they'd like to collaborate. But I
when you said the field guides, I was like, I feel like you could write a D&D manual like on this too.
I have a full RPG system ready to go already. It's rough. It would need some refining, but I have the basics of something that is pretty similar to for people who are very familiar with RPG systems. It's inspired a lot by Cortex and Savage Worlds, with a little bit of Call of Cthulhu, more Delta Green than Call of Cthulhu proper. I really like the sanity mechanic of those games, and it works very well for how I plan on having magic work mechanically. So yes, to answer your question, absolutely our plans and intentions to do some sort of Dungeons and Dragons type of role-playing game in Kaimere. I actually started to put together a Tales of Kaimere monster manual. I made stat blocks and everything for, I think it's like 40 Kaimere creatures. This was like 4 years ago, so the designs were not what they are today. But as I started to look onto the platforms, if I made it officially D&D compatible, Wizards would own the art and concepts. And I wasn't sure how to work around that, so I ended up not going forward with that project. Because if I have a agent hopefully pick up the novel when I get around to that one, I can't imagine an agent is going to want to work with someone who is tied in a legal battle with Dungeons and Dragons. So I pumped the brakes on that one. But yes, down the road, it's absolutely something I plan on putting out there.
Okay. So Justin just texted me back. He said his internet is just fading in and out. He's not going to be able to get back on, which is unfortunate.
That's rough. Yeah.
So I'm just going to text him if there's anything else that he wants to ask.
Good.
Yeah, it's kind of stinks.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so definitely, if there's demand for it, you would definitely be happy to expand with outside media set in Kaimere that includes television, film.
Yeah, I mean, again, my kind of I am not naive. I acknowledge that this might be about as far as Kaimere goes, as far as the reach of the project, but I can only do what I do with this if I am belligerently optimistic and assume that it's going to be wildly successful. I'll be making Stephen King money in a couple years. Like, I just, that is just like the mentality that I need to have approaching this. Again, I'm not actually, but so all that to say, like, my plan is to do a novel traditionally published, hopefully get an agent, work with an editor, get it traditionally published. Other media would be great. I think Kaimere probably would work better in animation than live action, but who's to say? It's definitely stuff that I've thought about. I'm not like, again, I just try to keep myself in check of like, keep my feet on the ground.
Yeah.
You know, I want
it's not
this
bad to have ambition.
Yeah, it is. Again, like, I know that if I don't assume it's all going to be very successful, I know it won't be. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so I simply indulge the belligerent optimism And yeah, no, that would be very exciting to get external media. We'll see where it goes. I've spoken with some creators.
The good news is that you know how not to write something from that watch party that we had on Netflix.
Yeah, it's. I try not to be too harsh, but man, there are certainly projects where I see them adapted, and it like any adaptation is going to come with changes. But I don't have very nice things to say about certain adaptations that I've encountered, and it has made me a little wary of that. I know that's putting the cart way before the horse, but it is something that I have in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, that sure would be a bummer if like things took off and then it just ended with a sad, wet trombone. That'd be rough.
Yeah. No, for our audience members that are unaware, there was a Netflix adaptation called The Wolf King of a fantasy series called Werewolf that I was a big fan of, as well as a couple of my other friends. I went into it with very low expectations because I saw some of the fundamental changes happening from the books that I didn't think were necessarily good writing decisions as somebody that enjoyed the books to a great deal. Mm-hmm. We did a watch party with Keenan. We also had another fantasy writer in that chat, Andrew. So it was the most chaotic, funny thing, because we would watch the episode and then we would unmute and everybody would just be like, what the heck was going on? And so it was like me and Julian being upset because it's like we know what's supposed to happen from the books, and then Keenan and Andrew being like, who wrote this? Like, what's going on? Like, just trying to comprehend some of the decisions that were being made. And then we had like some other people that had no writing background, were not familiar with the series, and they were just like, this isn't good. And it was chaos.
It was very unfortunate because I could tell that's always the worst, right? When you know that there's potential there.
It stung. It stung hard. Yeah. But anybody that, if the idea of, if you're very into werewolves and just like Therianthropes in general, read the Werewolf books by Curtis Jobling. They're amazing. Mm-hmm. I would stay away from the recent adaptation. Even though the author was involved, it does not capture the same magic as the books. Yeah, I'll leave it at for now.
Some of the middle episodes had a lot. Once they got over that weird, like, we're gonna pretend he's not a werewolf. We're gonna pretend that we don't all know why we're here. That miserably defined those first couple episodes.
When in the book they just genuinely didn't know.
Yeah. Once they got over that, it was all right. That is something that. A big storytelling lesson that I have internalized. Werewolf is not the first one to do it. It is just I don't know. I find it is rarely executed well to have a driving point of the plot be a secret you're keeping from the audience. I think that is the biggest sin of Rings of Power. I don't want to get too much into that, but there were a lot of things
I will talk about the warg design and how that is.
I liked a lot of the creature design in that show, and I think that show had quite a bit going for it, but man, it was just having who is Sauron when we all knew who Sauron was from that first trailer. It's like, what are we doing here? Okay, there were a lot of other issues beyond that, but man. Yeah.
I just think it's funny that they were like, for the warg, they're like, we're gonna make it a Chihuahua because of like the devilish small dog meme, and I'm like, yeah, but you also need to make this thing like powerful and be like a genuine threat. And the Chihuahua may be aggressive, but it's not a threat.
Yeah. Well, they also weren't big enough to ride was another thing that I thought was, because I thought the Intelligence were going to be the wargs, because those also showed up in the trailer.
Weren't they actually just wolves? Like,
well, they called them wolves. They had a pair of hooves. They had the jugal ossicone flanges and all of that. They looked like phenomenal Entelodonts, and I was actually a little bit like, man, I thought I was so cool and original making Entelodont riders that looked like wargs, and then Rings of Power, but then they didn't do it, so I was like, all right, well, cool.
they did it worse. They just literally called it a dog, and then it's like, well, that's not a dog.
So I was like, well, this works for me.
My favorite warg of the three film interpretations we've had has to be the Hobbit ones. They're just they're more wolf-like, but they still have like a good trade-off of power and speed. I think it's a very well-designed animal,
and it just looks like a demonic wolf, and that's ultimately those were great. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Lord of the Rings ones, the hyena, short-faced hyenas, those are really cool. I like them. But I think, the Hobbit gets more to the kind of spirit of what I think Tolkien was going for with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Justin's last question to ask you is, what advice would you give somebody that's getting started on writing their own science fiction or fantasy story that incorporates real biological concepts into their world building? What's the best way to keep it interesting for the audience?
I think that there is no better inspiration than the real world. And I think you are going to write more engaging animal attacks, more immersive animal-themed adventure stories than by exposing yourself as much to your own experiences or second and third hand accounts, as reliable as you can get. This one here, Jim Corbert's Man-Eaters, is one that I read as a prelude to working on Death Walks on Broken Wings. It didn't actually influence it all that much. It mostly was influenced for Nasiri because it ended up being a demonic pterosaur instead of but that would be my recommendation is tropes are extremely useful in setting up and executing satisfying narratives, and that's important. But I think there is nothing better than trying to spend time around animals and again, reading as many direct accounts from animal attacks, from documentary footage can be kind of hit or miss. Some of it's really piecemealed together in a way that, again, serves more of a narrative than a direct portrayal, I guess. But that would be, I think, a better option than... You could go a lot worse than just watching a bunch of documentaries that put in your mind how these animals interact with their world. So that would be my advice: is expose yourself to a bunch of animal footage and encounters, and see what inspires you from there.
And it is good to just mention as well, like, the more personal encounters you can get are good too, because a lot of times those videos are super cherry picked with what's going to be exciting for an audience, and it's not necessarily what the animal's doing most of the time. So being able to get as much unbiased animal experience as you can. In that regard is definitely going to shift your perspective of how to write things at times.
Yeah, I definitely wish that I had done more field work in college. I had originally planned on doing more, and I did do a program in the Everglades, and I've done a couple in the Adirondacks. I think that would have helped me a lot to get a broader foundation of animal behavior, and it is something that I was considering. I don't want to get too much into current events, but a year ago I was looking at possibly doing some field work opportunities that I am now no longer as enthusiastically comfortable with. But I think that there's kind of to your point, what you just said, like there's nothing like seeing it for yourself. And I volunteered at 2 zoos through my life, and that helped a lot. But again, the how animals are in the field versus a safe enclosure is very different. So yeah, I know money's a consideration, time is a consideration, safety is a consideration, but as much as you're able, if this is something you want to do, if you want to make wildlife a focal point of your creative work, I strongly encourage you to look into any if you're at university, a lot of colleges have study abroad. The Everglades course I took was through the study abroad, even though it was domestic. But like, look into those opportunities. I was able to do it thanks to scholarships, so definitely see what opportunities there are. But I can't recommend that enough. Getting out to the field and seeing animals.
I guess something to add on to that might be good. That's a more budget friendly option is if you're at a university, especially public research universities. But I know that there's quite a few private universities that do as well. If they do have any sort of environmental, forestry, wildlife sort of majors, even if you're not in them, they tend to have a student chapter for the Wildlife Society or American Fisheries Society. And, if it's really more of like what you're looking for in terms of writing certain experiences, there's also Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. They have quite a few student chapters. And so those are just like extracurricular clubs where they'll just like plan different events. You don't have to commit to anything always. But it's a good way to just get your foot in the door and be exposed to things. And so if you're in those relevant majors, I always say you have to be a member. You always have to do that. Like, any experience is good experience.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody that's just looking for that little bit of experience to enrich yourself, like, they'll probably be welcoming to you joining, even if you're not in that relevant major. I would say it's rare. I don't think I was meeting people that were outside of those relevant majors when I was in student chapter of the Wildlife Society, but I would say, there's no reason why they wouldn't be welcomed either. All right, well, we're getting down to the wire of our time available. Is there anything you want to ask me, I guess?
I mean, so many things. What originally drew you to Kaimere? Like, what you're someone who does a lot of nature work, so I can see that being just a sphere that we had crossover for.
Yeah, I guess that a lot of the early exposure was when I first joined Unnatural History Channel's community, which was a little bit after I had already graduated from university. I'd been out in the field for a couple of months at this point. And that really put me in the Spec Evo world because, even though I think his channel at the time was very Monster Hunter dominated because it was early on, but he had still done a couple of Spec Evo shorts at that point. So obviously now his channel is super Spec Evo with the Monster Hunter now taking more of a backseat because that's what the audience likes more. But I think that was really where it came from, and then people were sharing the work, and so I was looking into the videos, and I was like, okay, this is like, it's a lot well researched, because I think I hadn't really, outside of that, most of what I've been familiar with is kind of the classics. Afterman, not so much, but The Future is Wild, it was on Animal Planet. I'm a late 90s, 2000s kid that watched Animal Planet during that regime. It was on, and it never really tickled my fancy. Like, it always felt that they were a bit fantastical. And so with like some of these, it was, the interesting thing was like you still had, you were like, I want to have dinosaurs coexisting with these, more modern, like, big mammals and forest raccoons and stuff like that. And you never really went with the casual way that, unfortunately a lot of paleo media documentaries push, where it's like, oh, it's out with the old and in with the new, and extinction's always happening because something's out competing something else, when, it seems to be more like there's a change in habitat that makes something die, and then something new comes in because that thing is dead or dying. And so really, like, getting a better understanding of that, and so that really drew me to it. The illustrations as well, I mean, how can you not? They're fantastic. And so I think that's a big part of it as well. But it was just, I like Monster Hunter for a reason. It's because, the creatures in it are fairly grounded. There is an aspect of, like, we are going to make these animals, and we are going to make them feel like animals to the local people, and the culture is going to be centered around that. And I don't think a lot of monster or fictional creature media always does the best job of that. So when I see something that does do a good job of it, I gravitate towards it and become a fan.
Well, cool. Well, thank you. I mean, that's I ask because it's something that I've gotten a lot of naturalists and paleontologists who are happy to answer my questions, go over some concepts with me, but not a lot of them. There is almost an aversion to speculative evolution and speculative biology that I've encountered a lot. Again, happy to work with me, but don't really like the field, and I can see why. I mean, I think in a lot of ways it contributes to kind of a Pokemonification of an approach to the natural world. So I get why a lot of the people I've spoken with, his consultants, aren't really interested in the speculative evolution side of things. So I was just you were, so I was interested to kind of see
it's funny you mentioned Pokemonification, because to me that's the entire animal versus animal carnivora forums crowd, because Pokemon are designed with nothing but battling in mind. So that's where
and like I get it, like the quite a few of the animal stories that I have involve animals doing exciting conflicts, so I don't want to disparage that too much, but it definitely
and I work on predation. I work on predation. I work on competitive interactions between carnivores. I get the excitement. I wouldn't. It wouldn't be my job otherwise. But there's a way to talk about it while still understanding the animal, and I think also just being respectful. And I think just especially in this day and age where conservation is really the pinnacle of it, is I think you have to care about these animals continuing to persist in this world, and they're a lot more than just fighting machines and monsters, and you need to be able to understand that if we're going to be able to make progress. And that's how dire the situation is now, and and another aspect of it is, even if the fights and the hunts are impressive, some people go too far where you'll see, staged footage or, footage in these horrible captive settings where, if you actually like these animals, you shouldn't be wanting them to be in that situation in the first place. And you see a lot of people that, they'd rather care about who wins than, hey, why are these animals locked up in a cage together? Why are we creating this situation that they have to fight in the first place? And those are the questions that I think should be asked. And Robert Irwin put it really well with that whole 100 men versus gorilla viral debate, where he was like, why are you asking this question? Why aren't you asking how many people does it take to save gorillas? Gorillas are critically endangered right now. And so I think, there's nothing wrong with, being interested in an aspect that is on the more violent side, because I grew up going to a religious school that didn't like you talking about predation at all, and you were labeled as super violent, when, my aspect of it was like, it's incredible that this is how this animal is living. It has to kill for a living. It has to kill things much bigger than itself. It's very dangerous. And I understood that aspect and greatly respect that aspect. But, there's extremes on both sides. I just want to be very clear, because I think it's a recurring theme on our channel, because it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. Yeah.
Well, I love what you guys do. I think it is great that you and the Skeleton Crew have really, made it such a priority to take your time and really get into the full scope of your subjects. I think that's very cool and refreshing to have that level of engagement and nuance and truth and sources being at the front of how you're presenting it. And I'm very flattered that and excited that you wanted to have this conversation with me, because it's what you guys are doing, especially in this age of misinformation where it is so profitable to package and thrill with wildlife and paleontology and everything. I think it's very cool that you have this very educational, grounded focus to what you do, and I appreciate what you guys are putting out there.
Well, thank you. It means a lot, especially when we haven't released a long format video in over a year.
There's a lot going on. I get it. I want to see that panda thing. I would love to.
We got to get the panda video out. That's priority number 2 after I edit this, because this will be easier to edit. But no, it's great, and you're probably our biggest fan, at the very least our most vocal fan.
I am a beloved vocal fan of Wildlife Wire, absolutely.
But it's been great having you for this last hour and a half, and hopefully our conversation here will help out a lot of our audience members with their projects and give them, some food for thought. But I do want to, just because this will be going up on our channel, I do want to just say that we are going to have the link to your channel, and we can put the link to your Patreon as well. Any social media pages, we'll have that in our video description. I also want to put a link to your books, because as we discussed earlier in this interview, not enough people are reading your books. They're just doing the SPEC EVO side, and you should read the books. They're really good. I will definitely be picking up your next book that you're planning to get out fairly soon, and then I know you said you have another one slated for fall. Or are they both in the fall? Or
my plan was to have Haunting of Ho River, which is the one set on Earth modern times with the witches, come out in the summer. I'm waiting to hear back from. I'm in conversation with an indigenous consultant. And the timeline of that, because she's someone who has multiple jobs and is very busy, I'm not sure when exactly that will be, and there's a couple other things I'm putting together. That's the one that's going to have a fisher in it. That's my recurring critter in that story. That one My hope was that one would come out in July, and then the anthology come out in October, November.
Okay.
But that is all. I mean, I'm not even I'm not even finished writing 2 of the big stories for the anthology, because I put that on hold to do the Hunting of Ho River story. So all that to say, they'll be coming out relatively soon. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but that's our thing. We like to promote our partners and developers that we have on for this series, and I'm sure this is the first of many. You know, maybe we won't have you on for an interview unless things substantially change, something big and new comes out. But I know that you'll always be watching at least.
Absolutely. I the only animal that I can think of that I would be remotely big on contributing to would be sloths, and I wouldn't even have much to say on modern sloths, but hey, I will happily talk about sloths ad nauseum. So if you guys do a sloth episode, I will. I'm all in. I'm all in.
Yeah. The brown-throated sloth is like, I think the sloths and the bats will do. We're not going to do any of the other like small terrarium animals. It's just it's not really our area of expertise. We're mammal and bird people, and you know we'll do our best with the big reptiles, but and there's just not a lot of animations going on, so
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Probably
if
not
somebody
a whole
else
lot
wants
of
to do it.
Yeah.
If somebody else wants to start their long format that's herps and insects, go right ahead.
Please do.
Yeah. I'd love to see that.
Hell yeah.
But that'll be it for us. So unfortunately, Justin's not able to get back on.
Yeah.
He's having some big internet issues, but he still enjoyed the time that he had. So he texted me. But this is the Wildlife Wire, signing off.